this episode, we're talking about hearts on fire, the connection between metabolic syndrome, heart disease, and inflammation. You may know someone, or you may be afflicted yourself with some coronary artery disease or related condition. And the roots of heart disease and other metabolic conditions, they're really varied. And they include genetic, environmental, and lifestyle factors. And sometimes there is no earthly explanation for a condition. And there's no magic single bullet to cure every ailment. But the purpose of this episode is to explore some powerful keys to reduce your risk, lengthen your life, and its quality in addressing this lifestyle disease. And lifestyle diseases are challenging to discuss because, well, we do things that increase our vulnerability to these conditions. There are reasons that we may be contributing to the very illnesses that hurt us so much. In fact, especially with heart disease, and this is pretty stunning. This is from Cleveland Clinic. 90%, they say, of heart disease is preventable through healthier diet, regular exercise, and not smoking. 90% of nearly 18 million heart disease cases worldwide could be prevented by people adopting a healthier diet, doing regular exercise, and not smoking. Well, that hurts. If you're suffering and you are trapped in a lifestyle that is addictive, that's hurting you and not helping you, there's a lot of guilt associated with this. And I'm not here today to condemn anyone, because we all have had to deal with habits that hurt. And the enemy is right there to make you feel guilty so that you will not come to the only one who can truly deliver you, not only from the guilt of bad habits, but from their grip. That's the purpose of having a message that has the author of your salvation in front. This is what the devil does. He sits on your shoulder and he says, "Poor souls, I pity you, mourning under sin. But God has no pity. You long for a ray of hope, but God leaves you to perish and find satisfaction in your misery." This is a terrible deception. Do not give ear to the tempter, but say, "Jesus died that I might live. He loves me and wills not that I should perish." The Bible confirms this in John 3:16. The Word of God says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. He did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved." It was the meat and drink of Christ to bring hope and strength to all with whom He came in contact. That is my desire today, to bring hope and strength and courage to you as you address this most critical topic that affects not just physical, but mental function. So today we're talking about taming the fires of heart disease and metabolic syndrome. Cardiovascular disease in the United States affects nearly half of adults. It's a leading cause of death. It's the leading killer of both men and women. Well, we would talk about our pipes, keeping the pipes healthy, the arteries. But arteries are more than pipes. They are actually living bioactive tissues that contain, interestingly enough, powerful immune and other bioactive substances. So chronic inflammation underlies heart and blood vessel disease. Cardiovascular conditions are often caused or exacerbated by lifestyle factors such as poor diet and sleep quality, inactivity, and chronic stress. Heart disease begins in the arteries with a process that we all know of as inflammation. inflammation literally means on fire. And inflammation can be either acute, such as a bee sting, acute and local, or it can be general and widespread and nonspecific, like a fever. So acute inflammation is a good thing. It's the immune system's natural response to injury, to infection, or to invasion. I have a friend who was a helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War. He was shot down, he was injured, and his body is full of shrapnel, little metallic pieces that cannot be removed. There's too many. And even though he has a very excellent lifestyle, thankfully, and practices the laws of health to the best of his ability, he has high blood pressure as a result of chronic inflammation due to the invasion of these metallic particles. So he is on a medication for high blood pressure, but it's very much lower than if he disregarded the principles of living that are the foundation of good health. And so just because you don't get a bullseye with lifestyle doesn't mean we shouldn't be practicing the principles, because it might reduce the length of an illness, the time of its onset, or maybe avoid the bullet altogether. So acute inflammation helps the body get rid of what shouldn't be there. Chronic inflammation is a different story. Chronic inflammation occurs when your immune system is perpetually producing an inflammatory response to unnatural conditions in the body. So chronic inflammation manifests itself differently, and sources can include toxins, foreign substances, immune factors, or damaged tissues and cells. So it is this form of inflammation that underlies chronic disease. A cardiovascular surgeon was giving a presentation on this subject of chronic inflammation and heart disease, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes, and he said something startling. He said 90% of Americans need quadruple bypass. They need to bypass burger joints, bypass donut shops, bypass cheesy pizza parlors, and bypass liquor stores. Like a slow burning flame that steadily destroys a candle, chronic inflammation is a process that actually damages the body. So all stages of atherosclerotic, that's that fatty plaque buildup that is an immune response in the arteries, all stages of atherosclerotic progression might be considered to be an inflammatory response to injury. It's hard for us to imagine that when we're on this, what I call the chips, chops, and lollipops regimen, that this could be damaging, that it could be promoting inflammation, that the body perceives inactivity and overfeeding of refined foods, lack of sleep, chronic stress as injuries to the immune system. Virtually every step in this process is believed to involve what are called cytokines and other bioactive molecules and other cells that are characteristic of inflammation. So this chronic inflammation can be self-induced. And it's a factor and a foundational element in numerous other diseases, including type 2 diabetes, obesity, and certain cancers and autoimmune disorders. So this is a very important topic today, one worth our attention. So inflammation has some clinical markers that might include high blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol, low HDL cholesterol, so that's a bad profile, high fasting blood sugar, and insulin resistance. And we're going to see a picture of what that looks like in just a moment. There are also other factors, such as family history, there's genetic factors, smoking, abdominal adiposity. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that in a minute. It's really incredible how your fat cells are not just storage depots for energy. They're endocrine organs that produce molecules of inflammation when there are too many, and obesity. So some people have a strong family history of heart disease due to genetics. Others have a strong family history due to what? Shared lifestyle practices. I mean, the mother, the father, the aunt, the uncle, the kids, the dog, the cat, the turtle, all challenged because we practice what we've been taught. So either way, a healthy lifestyle can make a positive difference. We always encourage you to work with your healthcare provider when implementing diet and exercise programs, because your healthcare providers will help you to adjust medications as your parameters improve, help you to exercise safely, and work within the guidelines of your personal needs and profile. This is an interesting quote. We now know that the connection between obesity, fatty arteries, and a vulnerable heart are far more complicated, and that inflammation plays a major part in disease progression. Chronic inflammation is a common feature of what we call, or what is known as, metabolic syndrome. And inflammatory signals may actually originate within that mid-body fat, that visceral fat. It's a very metabolically active type of fat, as this fat depot expands in response to positive energy balance. So, obesity. The definition of obesity is not just bigness. It's the ratio of lean muscle to body fat. And with this definition, one study has indicated, and some others that followed, that 40% of normal weight college students have a condition known as normal weight obesity, NWO, normal weight obesity. The ratio of lean muscle to body fat is low, meaning that they are at risk for 30 different chronic ailments. So I know the term obesity is becoming politicized, but when I think of obesity and mid-body fat, I don't think beautiful or ugly. I think kidney function, pancreatic function, keeping your legs, keeping your feet. I think of a linear relationship with depression, with increased metabolic changes. I think of type 2 diabetes, and postmortems on diabetics can show up to 50% less of the beta cells that produce insulin. I think of joint damage. I think of poor quality of function. And so don't let a condition become politicized. Think about how valuable you are to God. Think about how He wants to free you from unhealthy practices that can help you to achieve a healthy, ideal weight, whether you're thin and have normal weight obesity, or whether you have manifest excess body fat. So what is metabolic syndrome? Metabolic syndrome is a combination of medical disorders that, when occurring together, increase the risk of developing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and stroke. And here are some of the characteristic disorders related to metabolic syndrome. So Having metabolic syndrome means that you have 3 or more disorders related to your metabolism occurring at the same time. And the more you have, the more you're likely to have metabolic syndrome. So that would include high blood pressure, high fasting blood sugar, elevated triglycerides, large waistline, and low HDL cholesterol. And this is really interesting because God has created us with backup systems to save our lives. And I think it's very interesting that when we develop what is called insulin resistance, the body is not processing and receiving into the cells the fuel for the cells, which is glucose. And we're going to see in a moment how that causes elevated stress hormone levels, deposition of mid-body fat, and a cascade of challenges that fortunately we can see reversed much of the time. So body fat tissue or adipose tissue is an organ with properties to make it a significant contributor to systemic inflammation. Now, this image that you are looking at is a picture of what we would call normal skeletal muscle on one side, and on the other side we see fatty skeletal muscle striated with fat. Now, when you look, and I'd like the picture to go back up so that you can see as I speak what I am talking about here. If we can put that image back up. When someone does a barbecue, they will often choose a piece of meat that looks like that fatty, that striated muscle, because the muscle has the fat, the meat is more tender, more aromatic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you prepare a piece of meat? How do you prepare an animal to produce this kind of meat? Well, the way that you prepare an animal or grow an animal to produce this kind of meat is that you have to keep them sedentary and you have to overfeed them. And that produces this striation. Now, if we could put the image back up again, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Now, here's what happens with insulin resistance. This is not a beefsteak you're looking at. This is human skeletal muscle. And when we are inactive and when we are overfeeding, the wrong kinds of foods, which affects how our body processes sugars and how insulin becomes resistant. The insulin is like a grocery boy that carries the groceries to the cell. So the insulin is the grocery boy. The groceries are the glucose. We eat the food, the blood sugar goes high, and the grocery boys can't get the groceries into the cell. That's what happens when the muscle is striated, as you are looking at right here. So the grocery boy calls for more grocery boys to help find the doorbell. And that is called hyperinsulinism. And so in the beginning stages of diabetes, the body is producing more insulin because of this dysregulation of the ability of the cells due to high-fat diet and striation of these fatty tissues to be able to receive the glucose. So now you have high blood sugar and the energy is not getting into the cell. So one of the first symptoms of this is actually fatigue. And often that drives eating and drinking patterns to deal with a symptom of something that is metabolically becoming deranged. Now what happens as a result of that high-fat meal, that sugary shake, the blood sugar goes up and the body has a rescue system besides even just dumping the sugar into the urine. Now the body produces a stress hormone in larger amounts called cortisol. It's a longer acting stress hormone, and what it's going to do is it senses that there's danger. That's why the stress hormone is circulating. It causes the liver to release what are called free fatty acids. Those free fatty acids glom onto the sugar molecules, producing triglycerides, and it lays those triglycerides right around the middle. It's a backup system to save life. Fortunately, Exercise and a change in diet can begin to reverse this process. We begin to have more energy, less fatigue. The muscle becomes defatted. It's really interesting because a good bout of aerobic exercise can increase insulin sensitivity anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days. That is so good news. That is such good news. And your muscles actually contain what are called glucose transporters. They are proteins that will travel to the external surface of the muscle cell and grab sugars, regardless of insulin insensitivity. And so a good diet and exercise program actually increases the number of these transporters. So even a type 1 diabetic with good modulated exercise and diet can increase their ability to handle their disease. So what about the brain? So there are a cluster of conditions that increase the risk of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. So metabolic syndrome includes high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, abnormal cholesterol levels. This is nothing new to many of our hearers. But it is also associated with mental health effects, with brain effects. And by the way, sometimes metabolic syndrome has no symptoms. You don't know what's going on. It's a thief. So metabolic syndrome and brain risks include depression, increased risk for depression, slower thinking, less alert, so you're going to be more accident prone, less energy, memory loss, and ultimately dementia. Now this is really interesting because when we think about dementia, there are many types of dementia, there are different pathways, so I'm not in any case linking one thing to one disorder. We're talking about many disorders, many factors, but I think we want to know some of the risk factors so that we can eliminate and reduce risk. So when we think of dementia, one of the things that we think about as occurring in dementia is memory loss. But the truth is that many years before memory loss, there's actually a decline in what is called initiative. So the parietal area of the brain, through inflammation, through atrophy or cell death in those areas of the brain, begins to affect our ability to practice forethought, which is consequences, oversight, which is making a decision, planning it, and executing it. So there are executive function impairments that occur many years. They begin to eat away at our ability to follow our own instructions. And so the good news for you and I today is that as we begin to implement exercise, high fiber diet, good sleep practices, stress management, it can begin to restore those areas of the brain that silently, quietly, gradually begin to decline because of poor oxygenation to the brain, poor blood flow, and neural death as a result of this inflammatory condition. It doesn't just affect the body, it affects the brain as well. Now, this is a very important statement. Dr. Brian Schwartz is the director of interventional cardiology at Kettering Medical Center, and he was such a wonderful blessing to me in preparing these materials, going over them with me. And he says here, and this was very important to include in this program, the presence of obesity increases the risk of heart disease, whether you have metabolic syndrome or not. The good news is that a loss of adipose tissue or excess fat is associated with a decrease in markers of inflammation. The health benefits of a weight loss are attributable in part to decreases in inflammatory signals sent out by the fat tissue itself. Now, I'm not promoting being skinny as a stick. Some people have larger frames, more muscle, but I'm here to tell you that excess weight, carrying extra body fat is not harmless beyond your healthy weight. And when you practice good lifestyle principles, your body will achieve over time healthy weight. For every 5 pounds of weight loss, you're going to take 15 pounds pressure off your knees. Now, that's the kind of math that we like. The case is compelling. Exercise matters. A healthy body weight matters. You can win this battle one step at a time, one bite at a time, one day at a time. We do not promote extremes. Let's talk for a few minutes about quenching those fires of inflammation. Is there anything that you can do to dampen those fires in your body? The answer is yes. So let's take a look at a few red-hot habits that can be quenched. First of all, we need to quench inactivity. I love this statement by Edward Stanley. He says, "Those who think they have not time for bodily exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness." It's really astonishing. More than 60% of United States adults do not engage in any activity, physical activity. According to the World Health Organization, inactivity contributes to 1 out of every 10 deaths. It's the 4th leading risk factor for global mortality. It's very hard to start exercising when you're tired. So we have to look at our overall schedule. We have to say, all right, I've got to pare down or I will wear down. And it may be that the very presence of the metabolic conditions that I'm afflicted with are lowering my energy reserves. But let's remember this. Energy is produced in muscle. And so as you exercise, and it's a paradox, you may go out the door and you're thinking, I don't feel like this, I'm tired, I'm weary, my mind is sad, I don't feel good. You take those steps. Take those steps. Get that walk in. Do that gardening. And paradoxically, it increases energy, especially as you work those muscles. Really wonderful exercise physiologist from the University of Tennessee. I've attended some of his meetings. And here is his recommendation on exercise. He says, keep track of how many steps that you take every day for a week. Then divide by 7, and that's your average. Start adding 500 steps and acclimate yourself to 500 more and 500 more and 500 more until you get a healthy amount of activity in your life. Don't focus on what you can't do. Focus on what you can do and maximize it. Inactivity is actually an independent risk factor for elevated markers of inflammation in at-risk individuals. In fact, there's a dramatic increase in risk for diabetes just from inactivity. So we all need daily exercise. Taking time for exercise is going to improve performance, it's going to improve energy, mental clarity, and it actually is a creative, it increases well-being and creativity as well. This is interesting. Physical activity is the main non-genetic determinant of fitness. Also, it has beneficial effects on body and fat distribution. So you may have a lot of visceral fat, but exercise can redistribute it as subcutaneous fat, which is not as metabolically active. So that is just really great news. So it has a beneficial effect on body fat distribution, insulin sensitivity, and other characteristics of the metabolic syndrome. So when your cells are more sensitive to insulin, the glucose can get into the cells, you'll have less fatigue and less brain fog. So daily exercise strengthens heart function, it lessens the risk of stroke, it lowers blood pressure, it improves your cholesterol profile, it can improve vascular function and reduce the need for invasive procedures such as stents and bypasses. So physical activity and dietary factors, and this is a quote from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, can influence nitric oxide production. Exercise enhances nitric oxide production in vascular endothelium. So there you have it. Let's quench inflammatory diet. The foods that you are choosing to eat or not to eat affect systemic inflammation. Food categories that fuel inflammation include fried foods, refined carbohydrates. In other words, they are dense in a certain specific macronutrient, such as fat or protein or sugar, but they're very low in the antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, dietary fiber. Meat, especially red meat and high-fat dairy, added sugar, calorie-laden drinks. Half of our added sugar intake is through those types of drinks, and another 30% are the snack cakes and candies and cookies, those types of things. So what can we do? There's no one food that is a magic bullet for heart health, but nature's amazing array of plant foods work together to build and maintain optimal mental as well as physical health. Many studies, this is from the American Heart Association, many studies have shown that vegetarians who are eating healthy vegetarian food, i.e. grains, nuts, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, seem to have a lower risk of obesity, coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, mellitus, and some forms of cancer. So here's the beauty. A well-planned, plant-based diet is going to maximize the absorption of the nutrients that you consume, their utilization within the body, and their retention. So a well-planned, plant-based diet provides the right nutrients in the right calories, in the right ratios, and in the right amounts. So plant foods provide the right mix of nutrients, fiber, plant phytochemicals, and it's like running a high-octane fuel in a plane rather than a lawnmower, rather than with lawnmower gas. So do you think it would make a difference? It absolutely does. So when I think of satiety, the word satiety has to do with satisfaction, meal satisfaction. So I think of three elements of nutritional satiety. There's volume satiety, which the plant foods provide, volume satiety. Then there is cellular satiety, where the nutrients actually have access, they can get into the cells. And then there is nutritional satiety. So there's nutritional satiety, volume satiety, and metabolically, this makes a big difference. This is interesting. Let's take a moment here just to point out some amazing benefits of certain classes of plant foods. It's really interesting. During the pandemic, I saw rapidly depleted groups of foods from the grocery store. I saw people lined up at the freezer to get certain types of foods, comfort foods. And I went into the produce department and I never saw a run on asparagus. I never saw a run on greens. And these are the very things we need. So, green leafy vegetables are among the foods most protective against coronary heart disease and ischemic stroke risk. We want to enjoy whole grains. Whole grains and beans have an amazing array of heart health benefits. And I've said this before, but just 1 cup of beans provides approximately 15 grams of dietary fiber, 15 grams of protein, more antioxidants than berries. And they're inexpensive. So when you combine those good beans, a great source of soluble fiber, with your quinoa or brown rice or whatever whole grains that you like, that is a great start to lowering systemic inflammation and managing blood sugar. Now, there's different types of dietary fiber. Plant foods contain them all in different ratios. So soluble, you hear about soluble fiber. Soluble fiber is associated with decreased risk of cardiovascular disease beyond levels achieved by a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol. So just lowering the intake of inflammatory foods does not equate necessarily to better metabolic profile. We need to focus on adding more of the good stuff. When you think of soluble, it's easy to confuse that with the idea of digestibility, but solubility has to do with the water holding capacity. So the more soluble fiber foods you get in the unrefined form, the more water holding capacity they have. For instance, there's good, better, and best. There's instant oats, regular oats, then there's steel cut oats and oat groats. So the more unrefined grain is going to improve and increase that water holding capacity, which means that you are going to stay fuller longer. The site of digestion being the small intestine, the absorption of those nutrients is going to take place more efficiently. Blood sugar will be better controlled because of the slow release of those beautiful carbohydrates that the cells need for fuel. And then in addition, the fiber components, the non-digestible, intact, intrinsic components of the plant food that progress to the colon are going to feed the bacteria of the gut. They will be fermented into short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, and that feeds the colon cells, reduces inflammation, and also their metabolites produce neurotransmitters which are associated with improved mood and well-being. What a package! What a package! I'm so thankful that I don't have to have a different approach to high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. Now, there are individual sensitivities and individual things that people need to do that might be particular to their situation. So some people are indeed gluten intolerant. They may need to watch those things. But overall, the dietary pattern of plant-based nutrition is going to lower inflammation, improve health, and improve gut health and brain health. Insoluble fiber is very interesting because it's also associated with decreased cardiovascular risk, slower progression of cardiovascular disease in high-risk individuals. So that would include whole wheat breads, wheat cereals, wheat bran, rye, rice, barley, quinoa, cabbage, beets, carrots, Brussels sprouts, turnips. I want you to crave more of the good stuff. We think about the typical diet today. It's sweet, salt, fat, sweet, salt, fat. And we think of genetic receptors and taste receptors. So we were taught in school that we have four basic tastes: sweet, salt, sour, and bitter. But the truth is, there are thousands of genetic receptors on the tongue, and they're attached to cortical areas in the brain. And so when these beautiful fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts and seeds, healthy fats, when they cross over the tongue, it activates genetic receptors for these flavors, for the color, for the texture, all the things that give these natural foods their exquisite subtlety and their aroma and their taste and their look, their eye appeal, their mouth feel. And as you experience testing, tasting, and practicing these new foods, your brain begins to encode how good they really are. And so just because you don't like something now doesn't mean you can't like it later. Expose yourself to these beautiful foods and you will learn to crave the good stuff. Otherwise, life would be torture. So let's pause for a moment and see how that works. Whole grains build a better brain and lower inflammation. And by the way, FAT is not spelled BAD if it's the right kind. And this recipe combines both of those components in the most delicious way. This is my go-to food. I keep them in the freezer. They are called Wowzer waffles. And if you try them, you'll know why that's what I named them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a nice batch of these Wowzer waffles today, and I hope you get as excited as I am about incorporating them into your daily routine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 cups of oats, of rolled oats, put them in this is a Vitamix blender. So if you have a high-powered blender, you can do the whole thing in the blender. If you do not, then you want to mix these ingredients in a bowl and then scoop the ingredients to the capacity of your blender. But either way, it's going to be delicious. Now I'm going to add a secret ingredient, which is no longer a secret. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of chia seed, ground flax seed, and hemp seed. Now you can do any combination of these. You can use all ground flax. I just really enjoy putting the mixture of these different seeds. They're very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, so I'm going to really increase the brain health potential of this batch of waffles just by adding these seeds. The next thing I'm going to add is 1/3 of a cup of cornmeal. Now the thing that makes the cornmeal important is that it's going to change the consistency of the oat waffle. It's going to give it a nice, chewy, delicious flavor and essence. And I'm putting 1 cup of whole wheat flour. So far, so good and so easy. Now for sweet and fat, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of some sort of like an earth balance or smart balance and 2 tablespoons of honey. And you can vary this the way that you want. And thank you so much to our crew. They are going to be enjoying these waffles. So this is from the grocery store. This is ground flaxseed. I buy the whole flaxseed and grind it myself. I keep them in the refrigerator. This is shelled hemp seeds. Absolutely delicious. Gives such a nice consistency to these waffles. And then last but not least, chia seed, which almost acts like an egg binder in this waffle. So that's what I'm adding. And now, last but not least, I'm putting in a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and I'm putting in a couple teaspoons of cinnamon just to give it a really wonderful aroma. You can also add a little bit of vanilla extract or maple extract. Really delicious. It gives it a little different smell because, you know, food is not just about the mouthfeel. It's about the flavor and the color as well as the texture. That's what makes a beautiful meal. So that was easy. I make these for my neighbor, for children, for my grandchildren, and I have a stock of these all the time in the freezer. Now I'm just simply going to add some water. These are a great source of soluble fiber because the oats are rich in soluble fiber. The seeds are rich in soluble fiber, but they also contain insoluble fiber and resistant starch. It's just a trifecta of blessing. Now I'm going to get these bags out of the way, and I'm adding water to blend. Now because these are soluble fibers, solubility refers to the water holding capacity. So as this batter sits, what do you think is going to happen to it? It's going to get thicker, isn't it? And so as it thickens, we're going to have to continue to add a little bit of water. So there's not just science to this, but there's also a little bit of art. So I'm going to turn this on, get it blended. I thought I was going to. There it is. Okay, I'm going to blend this. And I'm going to smell it for you. It's fantastic. It's so delicious. I can't believe I get to travel from home and make my favorite meals. So here are the gorgeous Wowzer waffles, and as they sit, it is going to thicken. So here is what the batter looks like now, and as it sits for just a minute, it's going to get a little thicker, and that is what we want. So this is really, really beautiful. Now I'm going to prepare my waffle iron. I'm going to put a little bit of release on it. I use a pump spray at home for mine, but this is really nice. I'm just going to spray this, and now I'm going to see if I can do this without his help, although I appreciate it. I hope you can see me pouring this gorgeous batter in here. This is probably going to take, don't want to put too much, it's probably going to take about 7 to 7.5 minutes, but you need to go by your own waffle iron. Now I'm going to flip this again, Oh, that was easy. Maybe I would like one of these. Now I'm going to actually make a double waffle with this. I think this is really fun to learn how to use a new piece of equipment in front of a lot of people. Okay, so now I'm making, this is great. I like this. Do you give your guest speakers things like this for gifts? Now, do you see how it's already a little bit thicker? This is amazing. It's gorgeous. So we're going to close this down, and we're going to wait for 7.5 minutes and see what we come up with. All right, we're just moments away from getting these amazing waffles out of the waffle iron, but I wanted to show you first what the batter looks like after it has been sitting for a few minutes. And it's a very easy fix. What's the fix? We add just a little bit of water at a time. So there, just a little bit, and we're going to mix it up until, again, it's the consistency of a cake batter. A little bit thinner than maybe a cake batter. And it's just delicious. This usually makes about, in my crepes, it makes about 11 to 12 waffle squares, which is really nice. Just a little bit more and this will be ready, but I've got to get that waffle out because the crew is waiting. And they're depending on me to do this right. So we just keep mixing until it's just a nice pourable batter, not too thin. Look how gorgeous. All right, it's time to do the reveal. Gorgeous. This is our beautiful, look at that. Now, let me turn this, okay, that way, and open this one, and here's the other one. Wow. Look how beautiful that is. These are amazing, absolutely delicious. They freeze beautifully. When I have to go on a trip, I'll take 2 of these squares. I'm out the door with a piece of fruit and a handful of nuts, a couple pieces of fruit, and you are good to go. So let's just plate this. I'm going to put 2 of these. These are smaller. I'm going to put 2 of them here. And I love them just plain. They're delicious. They're fragrant, chewy, and they taste great. I'm going to put a little bit of nut butter on here. A little soy yogurt would be delicious on here, a little fresh fruit. Sometimes I'll slice apple, make a sandwich out of it with peanut butter and apple. We're going to put a little bit of blueberry jam on this waffle and get it spread around. And I'm here to tell you, these waffles are wowzers. You're going to love them. I love Wowzer waffles. I mean, think about it. Rich with oats, healthy cornmeal, fatty acids that are rich in omega-3s, the chia, flax, and hemp seed. These are a go-to food for me, and they just check all the boxes, not just for flavor, but for good health. So we want you to enjoy heart-healthy fats. F-A-T is not spelled B-A-D. So the fats that are found in olives, olive oil used modestly, avocado, rich. These are rich in what are called monounsaturated fats. And monounsaturated fats are especially good for the aging brain. Nuts and seeds. Nuts are actually 65% monounsaturated fat. And there's also something called a shearing factor. So when you are chewing on some nice raw or lightly roasted nuts, all of the pieces are not ground into a butter. And so you actually, there's a difference in what is called metabolic equivalence and the calorie content of those nuts because of the way we chew them. We want you to chew them well, but it's not like nut butter. And so those fragments reach the colon and are metabolized by bacteria, again, causing a very positive reaction in the colon. So these seeds and nuts and avocado, these healthy fats, improve blood cholesterol levels. They're anti-inflammatory. They help with blood sugar control and decrease the risk of type 2 diabetes. So the plant compounds that we are talking about today all work together. When I look at a plate of food, I want it to have color, a rainbow of color from fiber-rich natural plant foods. I want it to have healthy protein source. For me, that is a plant protein. And then I also want to have healthy fats as part of that meal. And they taste good. Keep arteries flexible. These foods reduce blood clot formation and prevent, slow, or reverse arterial plaque. That's really great news and good tasting news as well. Lower cholesterol, reducing inflammation, lower blood pressure, and improving circulation. So I don't want you to be obsessed with all the things that you're going to have to walk away from, because what you're walking into is so much better. Take it step at a time, meal at a time, choice at a time. Start adding more to what you already like that fits in these categories. And walk away from those inflammatory foods as fast as you can. Staying well hydrated is really essential, because drinking water is going to help you prevent dehydration and fatigue. It also keeps the blood moving freely, delivering oxygen and nutrients to vital tissues. Well, let's quench delay. You know what the busiest day on the calendar is for everybody? Just about everybody? Tomorrow. It's tomorrow that I'm going to change my ways. It's tomorrow I'm going to start that new habit. It's tomorrow I'm going to start exercising. It's tomorrow I'm going to write that letter of apology. Quench delay. I love this statement by psychologist William James. Nothing is so fatiguing as the eternal hanging on of an uncompleted task. People feel overwhelmed with the daily demands of life, and they put off making critical adjustments in their lifestyle choices. No one is immune to the attitude of delay. After all, tomorrow is that busiest day on the calendar. The very attitude of delay can cause more stress than the change itself. You know, there's pain involved in change. I recognize that. Pain. When you change for a positive habit, when you change to make a better habit, there's pain involved because you're doing something new. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that's Christ. It's life. It's freedom. It's more energy, more vitality, peace of mind. If you don't change, there's also pain. Not changing is painful. And there's light at the end of that tunnel as well. But unfortunately, it's a train, and it's coming to get you. So think about which pain you want. Quench distress. Stress is an ignorant state. It believes everything is an emergency. So you can be running to get to a meeting that is really not important, and every alarm bell in your body is going off, stress hormones flying, and it's really not important. It's not necessary that you're there. But on the other hand, there may be some things that are really critical that don't feel urgent, such as your time with God, making those healthy choices, getting that exercise. It doesn't feel urgent, but it's critical. We can be hooked on busy while ignoring life's most important priorities, such as sleep, nutrition, exercise, time with God, relationships. God's priorities for your life will not crush you. They will carry you through life's busy stretches and challenges. Quench defeat. Consider the postage stamp. Its usefulness consists in the ability to stick to one thing until it gets there. So we often lose courage faster than pounds. But dependence on God and developing a mindset of determination will help you achieve important daily goals. You will be better equipped to bounce back if you stumble. So creating that lifestyle is so very important. Creating an environment, managing stress, creating connections. Lifestyle is a tribute to the heart. The Bible says you were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit. You may be saying, Vicki, I don't know where to begin. I don't know how to start. Well, the Bible tells us very clearly the promise of God to rebuild your life, your habits, your heart, and your priorities. In John chapter 1, verse 12, the Bible says, as many as received him, To them gave he the power to become sons of God, to those who believe in his name. Reach out to God today. He says if we hunger and thirst for him, we will be satisfied. He says, open your mouth wide and I will satisfy it with good things. In verse 13 it says, who were born, not of blood. This is not from inheritance and genetics, nor from the will of the flesh. No, my willpower is shot. I need the will of God to give me his power. Nor of the will of man. Counseling is good. Those things are helpful. But only God can change the inclination and impulses of my heart in accordance with his will to save and not destroy. I want to invite you today to consider seriously the things that you have heard. Whether you have heart problems or not, the truth is we all have a heart problem. We all have hearts that have wandered from God. We all need his presence. We need his power. We need his promises. We need for him to restore in us the joy of being in his presence, because in his presence is fullness of joy. Your circumstance may not improve, but your ability to deal with it will. The strength and growth that you will experience as you walk with God through every circumstance of life will help you instead of harm you. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads in prayer with me right now as I lift up each and every one of you, because there's something I know about all of you, even though I don't know you personally. You're either just coming out of a trial, you're in one, or one is coming. God wants to protect you from self-induced misery and ruin. Will you make that decision with me right now to take his hand and walk with him to better health, better hope, and better life? Father in heaven, thank you for this time that we could have together. I pray that you would encourage and inspire each and every one to take that next step, whatever it is, that first step and then the next one, that you would give us all courage to follow you away from bondage and into joy. In Jesus' name, amen.